In mapping the Don, should we be looking at an area formerly defined as Don Township and looking at one planned colony controlled by a central authority or headed by a single founder, but as a whole range of lands, missions, schools, and settlements, and incidentally, the personalities involved with these. This is actually the town site map of Dresden. You would expect that that's a good map of where the settlement should be. Well, there's only one problem with that. At least two of the witnesses of the time say no person lived on the settlement except for a handful of people who worked there. And that is definitely not in agreement with the descriptions that you read of the area that say, even as early as 1846, when we begin to see some of the first descriptions in something called the Smith's Gazetteer, that there are at least 50 families in 1846, and that grows to several hundred later on. This view allows me to include early black settlement by Willoughby and Harris families prior to the founding of the British American Institute and prior to Henson's arrival as part of the Don history. If we've had this story that's well celebrated of Henson as the founder of Don, now what are we to make of that? I don't think it diminishes Henson's role, and in fact I think it frees Henson of a lot of baggage and a lot of negative things that his legacy really doesn't deserve. In fact, now we can begin to see him as a three-dimensional person that isn't connected to the story, and in fact can begin to see him for the other accomplishments in his life that to me are far more compelling.
That's what I call narrative pedagogy. That means he was using his narrative to push through things. It was like a political stand, because through his narrative, that's how he was known in Britain, and that's how he managed. I'm not sure he managed, but at least, you know, he got some help from the British, and in fact from that man called John Scoville.
We have been talking more on African Americans, African Caribbeans, even Afro-Brazilians, Cubans, but less is being discussed about the Canadians.
Hence the importance of those symposiums and lectures and gatherings. These are part of collective remembrance that would help, you know, keep the history of the place going.
Local information, of course, remains key to understanding links and trajectories and how they intersect with major movements and events in the U.S., Canada, and overseas. And so local research partners continue to work in gathering and interpreting local archives and records and other information.
One body of records which we have are land title records or land registry records. Part of the process of land registration required that 3 copies be kept. One by a purchaser, one by the seller, and one was legally maintained by the government, either the original colonial government or the later provincial government. Our records extend from 1791 to 1955 and cover Essex, Kent, and Lambton counties. So a fairly large area. We have over 5,000 huge ledgers. This is another archival record that we have. It's a listing of burials which took place on this particular page in 1854. And you will notice that the last, or you probably can't see because it's poor, the last entry is Henry Bibb, age 36. These treasures, which are absolutely so important to our research, individually, they may appear as scraps and as bits of paper, but when they're brought together collectively, they provide a body of astounding and broadening information which can be used to stitch together a most remarkable narrative, and also, if we carry that further, an interpretation or a synthesis and analyses of the body of information.
So the idea of the promised land is something that sweeps through the documents relevant to Canada that appear in the various versions of the Black Abolitionist Papers. The Black Abolitionist Papers as an entity began in 1976. And the project began with the thought that the documents very definitely existed to tell the story of black involvement in the transatlantic anti-slavery movement, including the United States, Canada, and the British Isles. The first thing to appear was the microfilm edition. Basically, the microfilm edition is the totality of the documents that were found, the 14,000 documents on 17 reels of microfilm, organized by name of the producer and the recipient, in the case of letters, of the document. Or if it's a document that has no name attribution, it bears the name of the organization that produced it. It is organized on the reels chronologically. So that makes it easier if you know an event or a speech or a arrival of an individual in Canada who may be from elsewhere, that allows you to go to those with some dispatch. These newspaper documents that turn up in the microfilm edition can be wonderful sources for tracking particular issues or ongoing events. And so newspapers become important in numerous ways. They become the means by which the movement spreads and grows initially. They become the record of the movement in many ways. One of the things you find, individuals who are fighting slavery and racism who are African American. So for example, if an African American abolitionist comes to Chatham and gives a public lecture, those documents are going to appear in the microfilm edition. If a collection of concerned local black citizens hold a public meeting in which they approve a set of resolutions on some issue having to do with slavery and race, those are going to appear in the microfilm edition. If there is an editorial that comes from one of these black anti-slavery papers, that is going to appear in the microfilm edition. And many of those written by people like Henry Bibb or Marianne Shad Carey, those are going to appear in the microfilm edition. You all have access to that at Chatham. It's a wonderful thing. Because of the expense, initially, only major university research libraries had that. One would have to travel to Harvard, Yale, the University of Michigan, and the University of Toronto, or places like that to have access for it. The fact that it is available now in Chatham is something to applaud the folks here for, and to applaud the Promised Land project for.
Our sincere hope is that the Black Abolitionist Papers remain a valuable asset for the community, and that it will be used extensively by our 3 black historical sites and their local historians, but also that it is one more resource in the community that will draw outside investigators to Chatham-Kent to learn more about black history. In this way, we hope that these important words and images are there to inspire and to inform future generations.
A few words about our collaboration with the Oberlin College Archives and the Hiram Wilson Letters. What the Wilson Letter collaboration promises is to really honor, in some sense, almost resurrect, a 19th century collaboration that the letters actually describe. So it's a nice completion of the circle here for us to be reestablishing that Don-Oberlin link in such a direct way. So to say that it supports this key component of Promised Land community research is, to put it mildly. The Wilson Letters are really, really important and so revealing. Letters that